All right, I'm taking for granted right now that you can see the email that I sent out this morning. All right, and if you can't, please let me know. All right, as it says, today we're going to go over the pretest. Tomorrow is your 6th hands-on test. There will be 2 problems on there. Starting at 8:15 tomorrow, I will spend about 10 to 15 minutes going over the test. It should be emailed to you by 7 a.m. tomorrow for those of you who like to work on it early. All right. Again, the test, I didn't put it on here. I will tomorrow, but it's due tomorrow night as always by 11:59:59. Friday will be our usual lab day. And next week, we're going to jump in and look at most of the rest of the object-oriented programming section that's in your book. All right. And finally, as it says there, the Chapter 12 written test, the Chapter 12 homework problem, and the labs that you're supposed to do from Chapter 12 are all due by 11:59:59 this Sunday. All right. So with all that out of the way, then let's jump in. This is the pretest, so I'm going to go back. I have already built the GUI for it because again, I've said this before, I don't want to take the time to build this in front of you. So this is built. I've also put the code in, and I'll show it to you for the clear button and for the exit button. All right, but we will do the brunt of the work. We would put in everything for the calculate button. Now, you can probably tell by looking at this, but in case you cannot, the gross pay, total employees, total gross pay, low gross pay, high gross pay, and average gross pay. Those 5, 6 different text boxes are read-only. All right, so the only place that we're going to be actually putting in data will be first name, last name, hours worked, and hourly rate. All right, and using those four text boxes, the first thing that I'm going to do in just a minute is I'm going to bring in that validator class that we were given in Muroc in Chapter 12. So again, that's the first thing I'll do. I've already come in here and I've set the accept button and the cancel button and the start position in the tab order, just again, so we can get going. All right. From the validator.cs class, we will use the isPresent, as it says there, for first name and last name. We'll use the isDecimal for hours worked and hourly rate. And we will use the isWithinRange. Now, these are just arbitrary values that I made up. So I said the minimum hours somebody can work is 0. The maximum they can work is 84, figuring out that that'd be 12 hours a day over a 7-day week. The hourly rate, the minimum is 0. And the maximum is $99.99. Again, these are just, for lack of better words, these are just arbitrary values that I put in. All right, it says use these methods in a manner similar to the way they were used in Chapter 12, but again, change the associated error messages if necessary. So this was the UML or class diagram. So as you can see, we have 5 fields. Each one of those fields, the class is employee. Remember, that's the first thing that you see up here. So that's the name of the class will be employee. These are the instance variables. So each employee will have his or her own first name, last name, hours worked, hourly rate, and calculated gross pay. All right. Then as far as the methods go, we will have just one constructor, which will bring in 4 of those 5 variables. We will not bring in the gross pay because that's not set. That's something that's calculated. In addition, we'll have getters for the first name, the last name, the hours worked, and the hourly rate. And again, we're going to be grabbing those values virtually directly from the 4 different text boxes. The calculate gross pay is, we're going to have to write a little bit of code for that, but it's not bad. And as it says, you must write your own get message as shown and your own calculate gross pay method. There is no get gross pay. All right, we could have done it all in there too, like they did in the book. So there's a lot of different ways this stuff can be done. Create a global employee list variable that I called employees of type employee. do this after you set up the employee.cs class. So this will be a three-pronged process. We're first going to bring in the validator class. Then we're going to write the employee class. Then we're going to write the code to make the employee class and validator class work together with our GUI. All right. Every time a new employee is created, in other words, we validated the 4 fields that we're using for input. All right, add the new employee to the employees list up here and show a formatted message box like we have here that shows that everything works. So again, you can see we've got Jane Doe 5020 and 1110. That's exactly what we have in here too. All of the final totals that are here should work correctly. So every time you create a new valid employee, that should be incremented. Their gross pay should be added to the total gross pay. If their gross pay is lower than any other employees, it should replace what's there. If their gross pay is higher than any other employees, it should be there, and it should be figured into the average. All right. All right, the gross pay calculation will say that basically if you work less than or 40 hours, you just get straight time, hours times rate. All right, or what we called hours work times hourly rate. But if you worked any overtime, you should get time and a half for all those hours you worked over 40. Now I'm going to take for granted, I'm just going to go on that unless you've got a question that, if you don't, you will ask. And if you don't ask, boom, we're just going to keep going and going and going. All right. So jumping back then over to here, the first thing I want to do is I want to bring in that validator class. All right. And I should be able to come in here and right mouse click on my employee GUI, add, this will be an existing item right here. And with me, and yours might differ as far as where it is, but under C:\Muroc, try that again, C:\Muroc, \, I've got a bunch of stuff in there. And one of them is the stuff from the C class. All right. Now they give me answers, but the answers that they give me are not for the homework that you've got. All right. The answers that they give me are for the things that are at the end of the chapter. But under student download, if I go to book applications and I go to chapter 12 and I go to product maintenance, you'll notice that one of the files in there is validator.cs. So I'm going to highlight that one and click add, and it's brought it in right here. All right, so I can bring this up. This is exactly the same class as the one that's in the book. All right, we're not using the is int 32. We're not using that one in here. We could just leave it here, but all I'm doing is I'm going to comment it out. It doesn't really matter whether you leave it in or you don't leave it in. It's not going to hurt anything being there. But we will be using right from the book. All right, so it'll say the name of our field is a required field for the is present. It'll say the name of our field must be a valid decimal value. And for our within range, it'll say the name of our field must be between whatever minimum and whatever maximum that we pass in. The only other thing I want to mention because we're very quickly, very shortly going to write the employee class, but before we do, all right, I did go in and in here, I did set up tags for these 4 fields. So the tag for first name literally is first name, all run together. The tag for last name is last name, all run together. The tag for hours worked is hours worked, all run together. And the tag for hourly rate is hourly rate, all run together. All right. Okay. So we now have our validator class in. So the next thing to do is for us to come in and write our employee class. So I'm going to right mouse click on the name of our project. I'm going to choose add. I'm going to go down to the second from the bottom and choose class. And for name, I'm just going to make this employee. And hit enter. As always, it starts to give me a bunch of stuff at the beginning, and I like to put the word public right there. Okay, So, if we go back and we take a look, at our test, I'm not going to do that right now. But again, the minimum hours and the maximum hours, okay, we had both of those. All right. And but we don't really have to worry about hours and rate in here because we're actually going to be doing that using the validator class in our program. But when we figure out the overtime, or whether or not, when we figure out the gross pay, when we figure out their overtime, it's did they work any hours over 40? And if they did, all right, and if they did, the overtime rate is 1.5. All right, so I did put in those two as program constants. So I've got a const decimal, and I just called it max straight. Call it whatever you want, of course. And I set that equal to 40.00 M. Again, that's the largest number of hours you can work without getting any overtime. All right. Then I had another const decimal, and I called it overtime rate. And I set that equal to 1.50 M. All right. And again, there are probably a lot of ways in which this program could be made to look better, to run better, or whatever. I think personally, it's okay the way that it is. All right. So that's what I have. Those are my two constant variables. And again, I'm just going to keep churning away. If you have questions, please stop me. We were told we had 5 instance variables. All right. So we've got a private string underscore first name, a private string underscore last name, a private decimal underscore hours worked, a private decimal underscore hourly rate, and finally a private decimal underscore gross pay. All right. And again, my hope is just looking at those that they all make enough sense that we don't have to go over any of them. Again, that was the same stuff that we were shown in the requirements. All right, so those are our 5 instance variables. Next, we'll need to put in our constructor. Okay. And again, its constructor is public. It's the same name as the name of the class, which is employee. And it'll have the 4 of the 5 fields passed in. Again, we won't pass in the gross pay. So just to make it simple, I said string FN for first name, string LN for last name, decimal HW for hours worked, and decimal HR for hourly rate. And again, we could have used the same full names in there if we wanted to do so. I didn't see any reason for doing that. So underscore first name equals FN, underscore last name equals LN, underscore hours worked equals HW, and finally underscore hourly rate equals HR. All right, and that should be a W. All right, again, hopefully just taking a quick look at that, everything that's in there makes sense. All right, and again, I guess what I'll do, I didn't know if I wanted to do this or not, but I guess what I'll do at the end of the class today is I will put this out there in a GitHub repo. All right. But this is stuff that you have to understand because what we're going to go into next week are some other features of using using object-oriented programming in C#. All right. Then we were told we should put in our getters. All right. So public string get first name, and it'll just return underscore first name. All right, so that's the first one. Another one that looks just like it, except it'll be last name. Okay, so those are the first two. And then we'll have our hours worked and our hourly rate. These will both be returning decimals. All right, and finally, our last one. All right, so that's everything. Taking it from the top then, we had two constants, the maximum number of straight hours that you can work or non-overtime hours, the overtime rate, those were our two constants. Then we had our instance variables of first name, last name, hours worked, hourly rate, and gross pay. All right. Then we come in here and we get our first name, we get our last name, okay? We get our hours worked, we get our hourly rate. The good news or bad news, depending on your point of view, is we don't know what order in which the user is going to put in these four fields. You would think they'd probably do the first name, then the last name, then the hours worked, then the hourly rate. But by no means do they have to do that. They can literally put these in any order they want. The only reason I'm mentioning this to you, and let me grab this, save it, and close that. Grab this. All right, is what we could do if we wanted to here. All right, is we could come in and if we needed to, we're about to write a routine right now, one more routine that's called calculate gross pay. So we could technically call that routine up here or here. All right. I didn't like doing it like that, but I'm just telling you that there's different ways that you can do this. All right. So I'm going to have one more. This is the public decimal calculate gross pay. All right. And it's calculate gross pay, not gross. There we go. All right. Right now, as you'd guess, I'm getting an error because I'm not returning anything. Okay. So if I do come down here and I say return underscore gross pay, that all goes away. Now we do want to do that at the end, but there's some stuff we've got to do in the interim here. Okay, and it's pretty simple. So if underscore hours worked, if it's less than or equal to max straight, all right, well, you should know this. What does that mean? Employee, oops, try that again. Employee worked less than or equal to 40 hours, no overtime. All right, no OT. Okay, and that, like I said, that should make sense. Now I'm hearing a beep in here. I just want to see what that was. No, doesn't say anything. So, all right. So then our gross pay is simply equal to the hours worked times the hourly rate. That's it. Now we've covered the employee not working any overtime. But if we get down to here, so if we get down to the else, all right, then all we have to say, I'm going to put a comment here, employee worked greater than 40 hours, has OT coming, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. This could be done over multiple lines. We could have added other variables in here. I'm going to show you the way that I wrote it. All right. And I tend to probably over parenthesize, but I did it like this because, again, I thought that the way that I did it made the most sense. So I've got here underscore gross pay equal. Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to handle our straight time. All right, so that's max straight times our hourly rate. So for instance, and we're going to add something to this in just a minute, but for instance, if the user, let's just say, worked 50 hours and makes $20 an hour, well, for those first 40 hours, which is max straight, that'll be times 20. So that'll handle everything but their 10 overtime hours. All right, so we've got that. Then next, I said hours worked minus max straight. Again, what that is going to do is that's going to figure out, all right, this right here is going to figure out how many hours they worked over and above 40. That's exactly what that's going to do. And I have to take that then, and I have to multiply that by our hourly rate times the overtime rate. And that's it. That's our calculation. So again, playing computer here, if you work 40 hours and you made $20 an hour, well, that's less than or equal to 40, so it'll be 40 times 20 or 800. If you worked 50 hours, it'll be 40 times 20 or 800 plus 50 minus 40 or 10 times 20 times 1.5. So you're making $15 an hour for all of those overtime hours that you worked. And that's it. So I'm going to do a file, save all, and I may need to open this again. I don't know, but I'm going to close it just to try to keep things at least fairly clean in here. All right. Now, before we get started, again, the clear, I want to clear, 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 clear. I don't want to clear any of these, but I want to clear these 5, and then I want to set the focus back there. And you'll notice clear and set focus, it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it clears those 5 fields, and it sets the focus. So nothing new there. In the same way, for the exit, I called exit program or not. This is the stuff that we've been using almost since day 1 in here. All right. So in other words, I can now test it. And I'm just going to check in here and see if what I've got so far works. So I can just put any junk I want in any of these. And when I click clear, these should all clear, and my cursor should go back over there. So you can see my cursor is right here right now, right there. So clear, everything cleared, boom. All right, exit. If I say no, I stay here. If I say exit, I exit the program. So in other words, as of right now, I've got those 2 buttons covered. So the only one that I still have to worry about is this calculate button. And we'll put that in just a moment. First, let's come in and put in our global constants. And I had 4 of them. They were all decimal. And first I had min hours, which is equal to 0.00 M. Then I had max hours, which was equal to 84.00 M. Then I had min rate. I called it min H rate for hourly rate, and that's equal to 0.00 M. And finally, one last one. And that was equal to 99.99, 99 M. All right. And again, as I mentioned to you before, I'm taking for granted in here that the stuff I'm going over makes sense and if it doesn't, that you're going to ask. All right. Now, we've talked a little bit about this before, but I'm going to add 5 variables here. Okay. And I'm going to make sure that with all 5 of those variables, these are the 5 variables that are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those 5 variables. Now, I may not have had to do it this way, but I made all of them static because there should be one copy of those that's being used by the entire program, regardless of how many employee objects I create. All right, so I've got static. First one's an int, and it's total emps for total employees. I could call it total employees, but I just called it total emps, and that's equal to 0. I don't know how I did that, except I misspelled. All right, so there's the first one. Then I've got a static, and these are all decimal. And I called them just, low gross. And I set the first one equal to $1 million. Why? We've talked about this before. That is going to assure basically that the first time I go through here, that it's going to reset. So the first employee will have the low gross. I also want him or her to have the high gross. So I set that equal to -1M. I guess I go 0.00M. All right. So all of that stuff, again, all I'm doing in here is I'm setting up. Okay, I'm coming in here and I'm setting up all of my, these are all the values that I'm going to have and be using throughout the program here. All right, I set my average gross. I set that equal to 0.00M. And finally, I set my total gross, which I just call tot gross, again, equal to 0.00M. All right. And those now I've now handled those 5 fields. There is still one thing that I have to do, and that is, well, really 2 things. All right. And the first one I put here, private employee equal null. All right. And let me put the other one in, and then we will go over what these mean. And really, that didn't even have to be private. I should be able to just say employee equal null. I'm going to leave it, but I don't think it matters one way or the other. But I've got a list here of, and notice when I type in the E, it now finds employee in the IntelliSense. And I call this employees. And I set it equal to a new list of type employee. And whenever you do that, you've got to put curly brace or parens on the end. Okay, so those are right there. Those are all of the variables that I have in here. The only one that you might be a little confused with, this is an individual employee. So an employee object of type employees. All right. Okay, so let's come in and actually do the code for our calculate button. Okay. So the main thing that I'm concerned with in here is going to be the gross pay. So I set up a decimal, called it what it is, gross pay, and just, I don't even need to initialize it. I can if I want, but that's redundant, but I can do that if I want to. All right. Now I'm going to also create a string, and this string that I'm about to create, that string, just so you see it, is what I'm going to be putting in here in that message box. All right. So as I oftentimes do, I called it output str, and I set it equal to currently added employee \n/n. All right. And again, that is going to end up going inside of my message box. All right. So the next thing I want to do is if all validity checks, and we haven't written this yet, but if all validity checks pass, create new employee object. All right, so this is going to give me an error in here. It's okay. We're going to fix that error in just a moment. So I'm going to say if is valid data. That's the routine that we're going to write. And again, I virtually took this. I virtually took this right from the Muroc book. All right, there's a bunch of stuff we want to do in these curly braces, but before we do, let's write the actual routine then. So let's come in here and let's write the Boolean data. Now, this is either going to be true or false. So this is going to have to return true or false. Remember, this is a shortcut for saying if is valid data equal true. All right, that's just a shortcut for it. So let's come down here and write that routine. So private bool is valid data. And again, it's not that we have to call it that. That's what they did in the book. So that's what I used. All right. So let's see. I've been usually calling this thing retval, but I'll call it success. Again, I think that's what they did in the book. And I'm going to assume that everything's valid. Again, I can always assume everything's invalid and be proven wrong, or I can assume everything's valid and be proven wrong. So I'm going to have a string here called error message that I'm going to initialize to the empty string. And what that is going to hold, that error message, all right? In fact, let me come down here just so we get rid of the one error that's here. I'm going to return success. All right, so this is going to be success, which means that if all of my validity checks pass, it'll stay true. But if any of my validity checks fail, it'll go to false. All right. This, if it does go to false, we're going to start writing stuff into the error message. And remember, we've got 4 fields, so we can have up to 4 error messages. We're only checking for the is present for the first name and the last name. We're checking for the is decimal for the hours worked and the hourly rate. We're also checking for the is within range for the hours worked and the hourly rate. All right. Okay. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say a bunch of this is going to be in here a bunch of times. So error message plus equal. Now notice if I put in validator dot, oh, doesn't seem like it likes it. So let's see. I know I had a problem with this before. We'll fix it in just a bit. So is present, all right, and txt first name dot text and txt. I'm going to put this over 2 lines just because otherwise it, well, let's see if I can make it work in here. So move this way over and we'll make this a little smaller. All right. So txt first name dot tag. I think that's a dot tag dot toString, I believe. Yep, it is. Dot toString. Paren. All right. Now, as I mentioned to you a minute ago, when I brought this thing in, this validator class, this is the only way I know to bring stuff in. But what I'm going to do is going to sound a little, for lack of better words, stupid. All right. But what I'm going to do, oh, I see what the problem is. Look, it says product maintenance there. I got the wrong namespace because I copied it over directly. That's why I'm getting that error. So the namespace that should be there is the same one that's in here. It should be employee GUI. So I'm going to grab this whole line here, copy it to the clipboard, go back to my validator, paste that in, and now do a file, save all. Now let's go back into here, and you'll notice that error message is gone. All right. So the first thing I want to do is, and I'm going to put comments for each one of these, validate presence of first name field. All right. And I'm going to grab this and copy it, because the next thing I want to do is I want to validate the presence of the last name field. All right. So this becomes last name here. And this becomes last name here. All right. So on both those, I am calling, on both of these, I am calling the validator classes is present. All right. The next thing I want to do is I don't want the is present. All right. So, but I do want the is decimal. All right. Now, so let's change these. This will be hours worked. And this will be is decimal. And this will be TXT. Both of these will be hours, hours worked. There, and hours worked here. All right. So now I have done 3 of my 5 checks. I have checked for the presence or absence of the first name, the presence or absence of the last name, and whether or not the hours worked field was a decimal or not. I'm going to copy this one down. Oops. And I'm just going to put it in again, but this will be the hourly rate field. All right. So again, hourly rate and hourly rate.
I've got an error message that has popped up on mine.
Okay. What does it say?
It's on the is president is decimal lines, and it's saying that no overload for method is present and is decimal takes 2 arguments. It popped up when I
Okay,
put the
well, then
tag
let's go
language.
back to here in the validator class, and let's look at the is decimal. There it is. I'm not, you know, if you copied it over, you can see when you look here, it has 2 things. See that?
Yeah.
So you may want to go back and look at your validator class and make sure that it looks just like this.
Yeah, mine only, I guess I didn't copy this exact same one. I had a lot of them pop up when I searched for it. So mine only has
Okay.
one. That's
Yeah,
it.
like I said, I took this right out of chapter 12 in your book.
Okay.
So it is in the book, and it's also in the book applications, you know, that you guys all got sent to you. All right.
Yeah.
So you're okay then?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I figured
Okay.
out how to fix it.
All right. Then there's 2 more checks that I have to make here. Oops. All right. This was validate hours work field is decimal. So it's this one. And those are 4 of our 6 checks. Now I have to say validate that hours work field is in range. All right. So again, this will be hours worked. And so will this. All right. Now I don't want the is decimal anymore. So I'm going to put this over multiple lines, not to confuse you. But as soon as I change this to is within range, it's immediately going to come up with an error message because that expects 4 parameters and I only gave it 2. So I'll put a comma here, and this will be min hours, and this will be max hours. All right, so that's doing a range check on our hours work field, and I can copy this then. And I want to do the same thing for my hourly rate. All right. So I'm asking the question, does everything we've done so far in this routine make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we have to check to see whether the error message has anything in it or not. Okay. If it does, well, we'd want to print it out, right? Okay. So in other words, if the error message is not empty, and we can say dot trim, it doesn't really matter that much, but if that is not equal, or if it's not empty, well, there's two things we want to do. We want to take success. In fact, before we do that, we'll just do a message box dot show, and we'll put in that error message. And I changed the title. They just put entry error, and I put down input error, or in other words, it could be errors. And then set success equal to false. Finally, at the very bottom, we return success. So I'm right then in assuming that everything that we've done in here thus far makes sense. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff that we want to do now inside of here. When I say inside of here, I mean back in here. Because now we know it either returned true or it returned false. If it returned true like this, which is what we're expecting right here, it returned true. Well, I'm going to create a new employee object. So I'm going to say employee equals new employee. And where does it get that information from? From the text boxes, right? So txt first name dot text. That's where it gets the first name from. And again, I'm going to put this on multiple lines. txt last name dot text. Now, we know we can now convert. So we can do a convert dot to decimal because we already ran the is decimal on this and it passed. So we can put in that txt hours worked dot text. All right. And finally, convert dot to decimal, not to decimal, to decimal. And that's txt hourly rate dot text. Oops. All right. So that should allow us to instantiate a new object. So basically what we're doing again is we're coming in and we're grabbing what we put into these four fields, and we are taking what's in there and putting them into those four fields. All right. I mean, maybe there's an easier way to put it than that, but to me, that just makes the most sense to say it like this. All right. Now I can say the gross pay is equal to employee dot, well, now we've got that calculate gross pay. All right. And that's going to basically call that routine. And now we can say txt gross pay dot text is equal to the gross pay that we just calculated dot to string, and we can format it to currency because it's just appearing in a read-only text box. All right, let's just check and see if we have any errors when we run this thus far. Okay, so I'm going to do a file save all, and let's come in and run it. Well, first of all, if we leave everything empty, we should get 4 errors, right? So first name is the required field, last name is the required field, hours worked must be a valid decimal value, hourly rate must be a valid decimal value. So that works. If I put my name in here, Now remember, the hours worked had to be between 0 and 84. So if I put in a -1, all right, and the hourly rate had to be between 0 and 99.99. If I put a -1 in for each, I get my message, hours work must be between 0 and 84, hourly rate must be between 0 and 99. I should also just check my upper end in here also. So if it was 84, if I put in 84.1, and if this was 99.99, if I put in 100, I should get the same errors, and I do. All right. Finally, if I come in here, well, let's try to see if we can do we won't have anything here yet. We won't have anything there. We'll get that in just a moment. But if I put a 40 in here and I put a 20 in here and I click calculate, I should get 800 there, $800.00, and I do. Well, that's good. And if I put a 50 in there, I should now get in here 1100. So it should be $1,100.00. And again, I do. So right now, we haven't done our totals in here, which we'll do in just a moment, but everything else, and the clear works as well. So everything else appears to work. So what I have to worry about now, so to speak, is coming up with the rest of this. So let's finish this. Okay, so this was valid data. I've got everything in here. Well, one of the things that we also need in here, and I can do them in order, but I don't have to. All right. In other words, what do I have to do in here? Well, I need to increment that, and I need to figure out the total gross pay. I'm going to do that one in here. I didn't have to do it the way I did it. Again, I just wrote it the way I wrote it. So I came in here and put in here TXT, I'm sorry, the total gross, which is called tot gross, all right, plus equals the gross pay. So that's adding it to my total gross pay. TXT total gross pay dot text equals tot gross dot toString of type currency. And again, I'm going to write a little bit more in here, but before I do, I'm going to put in 2 employees. I'm just going to put junk in here. It doesn't matter, but I'm going to have a 40 here and a 20 here like we just did. And now notice, I not only get that there, I get 800 here. If I clear, that 800 doesn't clear. Good. That's all good. But now we're trying a 50 in here and a 20. This should be 1100. This should now go up to 1900. And again, so far at least, it appears as though everything that we've done works. All right. Okay. So what's left to do? Well, we've got some statistics, for lack of better words, that we have to figure out. And then we have to add that employee. We have to add that employee to our list. So I actually call this thing here that I called configure stats. All right. And what configure stats is going to do is it's going to fill up all the rest of these. So this one, we already have the total. This one, and this one. All right. But I'll need to know the total gross pay when I do the average. And the reason I'm telling you that is what I'm saying is when we call this, we have to pass to it gross pay, because I did not make gross pay. I did not make this a global variable. I created it up here. Since it's a local variable, it has to be passed to the other routine. All right, we're going to write that in just a second. Okay. And but first, okay, I can do my employees dot add, and I can add that employee. So that'll add that employee. All right. And finally, I can print, all right, my employee stats. So we've got to write these 2 routines, and then the thing is done. So let's go to configure stats first. Let's write that one. I'm going to take this for now and just comment it out so I don't get that error. All right, so I'm going to come down to here. And this doesn't return anything, so it's a private void. And it needs to know the type of variable we just put in there, which is a decimal. All right, and that's the gross pay. Okay, so now we can come in and we can configure our statistics. All right, again, what I tried to do in here is I tried to take this thing and modularize it. What do I mean? You're going to see it right now. My total employees now, so my total EMPs, yeah, total EMPs, I can now say plus plus. I've now got a new employee. So I can now say txt total employees dot text equals total EMPs dot toString. All right. And again, I'm being very methodical here, but if I do come in, put in one person, I don't care what this is, 40 and 20. Now, when I click calculate, I should get 800 here. I should get a 1 here, and I should get 800 here. All that's working. Good. Like I said, this is the way you should be writing this stuff, modularizing it, and as you write routines, test them right away. All right. So I wrote another routine here that I call calculate low gross, and it needs the gross pay. I get the error because, of course, calculate low gross hasn't been written. So private void calculate low gross, and it's got the decimal. And remember, I don't have to call this gross pay. I can, because that's the way I'm passing it in. This is the actual parameter name. But in here, I can just call it gross if I want to. That's totally fine. Or I could keep calling it gross pay. It really doesn't matter. All right. So in here, I'm going to say if the current gross is less than low gross, which remember we set to 1,000,000 at the beginning, we can now say, whoops, I don't know what happened there. So we can now say low gross equals that gross, and txt low gross pay dot text equals low gross dot toString, and I can do it to currency. All right. And somehow I lost that ending curly, but there it is. So there's that. Okay. Now, again, being methodical, let's do this. Okay. So we'll do this in reverse. So I'm going to put this in here and this. Now I'm going to say 50 and I'm going to say 20 and I get my 1100, my 1, my 1100, and that's my low. But if I come now and change that to 40, this should be 800, that should be 2, that should be 1900, but that should change to 800. And you can see, again, it all at least appears to be working. So what we have left to do in here is to figure out the high gross and the average gross. We're going to do that right now. Now, for the high gross, it's basically this one, but I just have to change the sign around. So I'm going to copy this. Oops. I'm going to copy that whole thing right here. And then I'm going to paste it in. All right. But now I've got this in there twice, calculate low gross. That's why it's giving me the error. So I'll change that to high. And I'll say if it's greater than the high gross, which at first we set to -1. So now the high gross is going to be equal to the gross. And we should be able to print it out. All right. Again, these two routines are basically mirror images, but one's checking for the smallest, one's checking for a largest. Now I can come where I put this stuff in here. Where are we? Right there. And where I've got my print employee stats. All right. my configure, where is it? Okay, so I've got this configure stats, gross pay. So in my configure stats, all right, what do we have? Calculate low gross pay. Now we can call calculate high gross and put in there gross pay. Okay. So we can now, again, save and test that. Okay, again, just some junk in here, and in here, let's again do the 40, and then the 20, 800, 1, 800, 800. For some reason that didn't print. I must be leaving out the field, so we'll fix that in just a second. In fact, let's fix it now. All right, so when we calculate the high gross, that should say high right there. All right, and it didn't. So that should say TXT high gross. It's high gross pay. All right, and that equals what? So what isn't it like here? High gross dot toString C. What doesn't it like here? It says cannot convert type string. Oh, because this is dot text. There we go. So now, again, coming in here, I'll just put some buddy, and we'll start with a low. So 40, 20, hit enter. Everything looks cool. Okay, hit escape. Another person. And now we'll put in 50 and 20, and we'll see if our high gross changes from 800 to 1100, and it does. All right, if we put a 60 in here, that should become a new high, and it does. If we put a 10 in here, that should be 200, and that should replace the low. So everything right now is working. The only thing we've got left to do is our average gross pay, which again is another fairly simplistic one. All right, and then we've got to print out the stuff, okay, and that's going to go into that message box. So let me clear this. All right, so we've called calculate low, calculate high, and we can now call calculate AVG gross, which again will need the, in fact, that doesn't need anything because we've already figured out everything. Now I'm getting the error because this hasn't been written yet. So we'll write that right down below the calculate high. All right, so private void calculate average gross. And now we can come in here and say the average gross is equal to the total gross divided by the total number of employees that we have. All right, and the TXT AVG gross pay dot text equals that average gross dot toString, again with type currency. All right, and I spelled that wrong. There we go. So let's save that. Let's run it again. And we're going to, again, just put in some junk here and here. I'm just using the same test values. So 800, clear it. So this, under our average, should now be 1100 plus 800 divided by 2. If I did my math right, I believe that's 950. Hours worked. Oh, I didn't put a thing. There we go. That should be 50, and that should be 20. Try that again. 20. And it appears now that everything that's in here is working. The only thing that we still have to do is to print out that message box with everything that's going to be going into our list. Okay, so let me do that. And that was commented out in here. that was called print employee stats. So that I'll get an error because it hasn't been written yet, but down below here, we will print it out. So we'll put it right here. So private void print employee stats. All right. And again, as always, you don't have to do it like this, but I put in here that output string. So in fact, I started to fill that output string in up here. If you remember, where is it? Currently added employee. So I'm going to get rid of this. Why? Because I'm going to use it down here. All right, so currently added employee, and then let's just keep adding to the output string. So plus equal first name. I did a little bit of formatting on here, so I thought at least would look a little better. Plus, now I should be able to say employee dot get first name. All right, plus a \n. And I'm going to just steal this. So let's put in the last name. And this will be get last name. All right. Then next, the hours worked. I tried to line stuff up just because I thought it'd be easier to read. All right. The hourly rate. And finally, the gross pay. All right. And this is employee.calculate gross pay. All right. And dot toString, toString, and that'll be currency format. I don't need this at the end here. Just that. All right. So that's everything for my output string. Then I just put in a message box dot show, and the text is the output string. And the other thing that's in here, I just said final list stats. We could put anything we want in there. Oops, for a heading. And again, this is not an error. So I did a message box buttons, okay. And I did a message box icon dot information. Right? Let's take it for a spin and see if the whole thing works. So I'll put in 3 employees. So John Doe, 40, 25. Says John Doe 40, 25, 1,000 in here. And all of this stuff appears to be working. All right, I'm going to clear, and John's wife Jane Doe, who worked 50 hours and makes $30 an hour. So again, Jane Doe 50, 30, 1650. Okay, so you can see everything that we have in here. So 1650 plus 1,000 is 2650 divided by 2 is 1325. There's 2 employees, so it appears as though everything is working. All right, and then they have a son, Milo Doe, who worked 40 hours and made, $40. Oh, geez. And made $40 an hour. That should be 16 here. That should go to 3. That should be like 42.50 or something like that. That won't change. That won't change. And this will be about 1,400. All right. So it appears at least as though everything that's in here is working. Okay. So let me ask you, is there anything that you need me to show you on here that's not being shown? Is there anything that I went over that either you didn't understand or you think I made a mistake or whatever? Questions?
No, I think I get it. Yeah.
All right. If this makes sense to you, then what should happen is you should be able to do the test tomorrow. I'm going to give you, whether I should or not, at 8:15, a couple of hints that might help people. All right, so I'm going to come in here. I'm going to do a file, save all. All right, I'm going to close this and I'm going to grab that wherever the heck I put it because I've got a big mess in here. I don't know if it's the one I just did here. Chapter 12 pretest. It looks like a 1033. So I'm going to come in here, do a git bash here. Do my git init, my git add dot, my git commit, and it will say completed chapter 12 pretest. What didn't it like? Oh, I didn't put my -m in there. That's on me. Git commit -m and completed. Chapter 12 pretest. Okay, that's all done. I'm going to quickly run my way over here to my GitHub account. Double check and make sure that what I call this was, let's see, chapter 12 pretest. I did it in here. Doggone it, Jeffrey. Let's see. Well, it should be okay. Okay. Well, we'll see. I'm gonna try to make it call the thing employee, but well, we'll see. So I'm going to create a new repo. Me as the owner. Hopefully I don't have one called employee already. I don't. That's good. I'll keep it public and I will create it. Come on. I will grab the line here to set up my remote. Do a git remote -v to check. Looks like it's good. And finally, I'll do my git push -u origin master. Looks like it pushed. Let's clear this. And there it is. All right. So everything should be out there. I wouldn't normally have done this in front of you guys, but I just wanted you to see everything is out there. I will give you the link right here to my GitHub repo. So if you need that, if it can help you, fine. So tomorrow will be the pretest. The Friday is a lab, so there'll be no taping or anything done. I will tape for about 15 minutes tomorrow. The pretest will be emailed to you by no later than 7 a.m. It is due by midnight. All right. And on Sunday, your chapter 12 written test, labs, and homework is due. On Monday of next week, we're going to jump in and at a minimum, we're going to do chapters 13 and 14. Probably what we will do is 13 and 14 on Monday and then 15 and 16 on Tuesday. All right. We're only going to grab a little bit of the stuff from 13 and a little bit of the stuff from 15. All right. That's it. Okay, thanks for sticking around. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, have a good one.
You too.